What's up, guys? Dylon here, and today I'm going to be talking about a interview I did with the Economic Ninja. I'm going to be going through some of the comments that people had in on the video to address some of those things. So, like this video, comment, share, subscribe, and let's get rolling. So, this is me and the Economic Ninja. He texted me. He's like, "Hey, I want to do a live stream. Hop on. We're going to talk about Bitcoin." So, I appreciate him having me on. But I just want to address some of the comments because when we talk about Bitcoin, there's so much stuff, and people come at it from all different perspectives. And I can't always cover everything when I talk about it. So let's go and let's look at some of the comments. And, it is a rabbit hole when you go down this, the Bitcoin thing. And people have so many questions. And my first piece of advice is take the time to actually study and learn it. I'm going to say this over and over and over again is if you haven't spent an hour, spend an hour. If you spent an hour, spend 10 hours, right? Take the time to learn about it so that you can make an informed decision. Because I hear and see a lot of comments that people make, and it kind of saddens me because it clearly shows that they haven't taken that time to learn about it, because they just make comments that they hear. They're basically just headlines that people have heard throughout the years, or they think they listen to someone talking about it, someone like Dave Ramsey who hates it, or Peter Schiff who hates it, and they just take them at their word. And they don't understand those guys have like incentives in selling other things. They don't need, or Warren Buffett, for example, they don't need to like Bitcoin, right? They make their money in business selling other stuff, and so they don't need to like it. And so people hear them trash it because, like, Warren Buffett doesn't need to know about Bitcoin, right? Dave Ramsey doesn't need to really know about Bitcoin in general. I think they do, right? But I've come to that conclusion because of the research that I've done. If I would have just listened to them, and in fact, I did just listen to them. I listened to Peter Schiff when I first got into the space, or when I first thought about getting into the space, and I didn't do my own research, and I didn't get into the space when I should have gotten into the space. Because like, oh yeah, Bitcoin's $500, it's too expensive, and I was listening to Peter Schiff, and he's like, oh, Bitcoin's going to go away. Who's trashing it? And he's been trashing it for years, 10 years or more. Peter Schiff has been trashing Bitcoin. He's been wrong, because here we are 15 years later, and we're still talking about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is bigger and better than ever. So now is a good time to do the research. Let's talk about some of these questions, shall we? So let's dive in here. So going down, let's see here. There's a lot of spam comments. So by the way, if you see comments like this and they have a bunch of replies like, "Thank you, Miss Peggy Sean," that is a scammer, right? That is a spam comment. Do not engage with that. Do not trust that. Those are not real people. So you'll see a few of these on these videos. So whenever there's a crypto or Bitcoin video, these scammers talk about this kind of stuff. Hey, I just, it's really important to invest, and I made this much money. You should check out. And then they give like some normal name, like Miss Peggy Sean, right? Don't trust that. Don't trust that stuff. Those are scammers. I don't listen to that. So the first comment is the whales are going to bring it down to flush out the small fish and then gobble it all up. This person's not wrong, right? There are people with large holdings of Bitcoin, and they know what Bitcoin is. You wouldn't have companies like BlackRock. You wouldn't have the SEC approving a spot ETF. I couldn't say these things years ago, even though I knew them to be true. But you wouldn't have companies like that and institutions like that allowing Bitcoin to exist like it does, allowing that spot ETF, if there wasn't more to it, right? A couple years ago, I couldn't say that because that hadn't happened officially yet. But now, because it's officially and out there, I can say that. I mean, even though I didn't believed it back then, we have evidence now. So, right, what's going to happen? They want your Bitcoin. They need your Bitcoin. And what's going to happen is that there are whales, people with large holdings, and what they're going to do is they know that they can influence the market, the moods and actions of the masses, of the little fish, the minnows, right, the shrimp, if you want to use sea creatures, the shrimp, and they can make the market go down, right? Sell a bunch and then buy it back up, right? Because they want to accumulate Bitcoin. They want your Bitcoin. So when that happens, do not sell, right? I think you should be in Bitcoin for the long term. Of course, none of this is financial advice. I have other videos on that, but we're just going to address the comments today. So this will happen, right? And when that happens, the best thing generally for you to do is treat it as a sale on Bitcoin and buy more, right? It's basically like you got a raise. Your fiat dollars can buy you more Bitcoin. Let's see here. This person says retail. Let's see what this person says. Retail banks don't have enough cash to cover their obligations. They're leveraged 15 to 1. That's not necessarily wrong. The numbers might be off, but yes, they are, right? Right, because you give a bank your cash and they can loan out against it. And I think they have to have, man, it might be they have to have 90 or 10% of reserves on hand, and it's different for different banks. Look it up. They don't actually have the money in there. Gold ETFs don't have enough available gold to cover all their deposits. That's why they're overcommitted by a factor of 3 or more. That's why it's paper gold. I'm not an expert on gold ETFs or those financial products, but unless it's a 1-for-1, then you have an issue. And this has been an issue historically. This was the problem with fiat being backed by gold, is you have to generally centralize the gold in a bank or a trusted institution, and they have to, based on their reputation, guarantee that the gold is actually there in the vault so you can redeem your note for gold. Well, we all know we went off the gold standard. Was it 1971 around that time? I could be off on the date, so forgive me if I am. But we went off the gold standard so that you couldn't exchange a fiat note, $1, right, for the equivalent in gold. So we don't do that anymore. And part of the reason why is what this guy addressed in the thing is they don't necessarily have all the cash to cover their obligations. So what would happen is that the banks back in the day would take your gold in and say, okay, we can exchange note for gold. But then they started like exchanging more notes than they had gold on hand, and it started to work for them. As long as not everyone wanted to get their gold all at once, because if that happened, they couldn't actually allow it because they didn't actually have enough gold, and so that creates a run on the bank. That's not a problem if it's a 1-for-1. It shouldn't be a problem in that situation. Or if they have extra, where if there's less notes out in circulation than what they have assets on hand. But we know with fractional reserve banking, they don't do that. So gold ETFs maybe, but so make sure you pick the right one. If it's a 1-for-1 or whatnot, that you could actually redeem it. So this person says, why should Bitcoin be any different? JP Morgan will tell you anything, even paper Bitcoin. They're right and wrong. Right now, the ETFs, I think, have to be 1-for-1. They're spot ETFs. So you buy it. You're not buying Bitcoin directly, but you buy the ETF, right? The exchange traded fund. You buy that. And I'm no ETF expert, but you buy that. And then the ETF, the people who run the ETF, have to go buy the corresponding amount of Bitcoin or have the corresponding amount of Bitcoin available so that more money can come, so external money can come in. So they have to have that. If they don't have that, then that's a problem. And we'll probably see that problem come up in the next few years, because Bitcoin is one of the only assets out there where you can actually truly custody it, self-custody. You can be like, hey, I need my Bitcoin. I'm going to custody this asset, right? You can request to receive that asset. And so if you're buying an ETF, right, you can make that request, but you run into the problem of it has to be approved by a third party, versus if you buy Bitcoin directly, you're the person that controls it. So there's no third party involved there. So that's a distinction between buying Bitcoin directly versus buying an ETF. Really, the only reason you should buy an ETF, just generally speaking, is if you can't buy Bitcoin directly, for whatever entity you're using to buy the Bitcoin or want to have exposure to it, it doesn't allow you to buy it or doesn't make sense, then the ETF might be viable. But it's generally better to just hold the underlying asset. And with Bitcoin, you can hold it. And even if you're an institution, there are ways that you can hold the Bitcoin where it's not like you holding your own personal keys. Like Michael Saylor probably doesn't hold the keys to MicroStrategy's Bitcoin. It's probably stored with a custodian with a multi-signature setup. There's probably a lot of legal papers and frameworks set up to structure that to make sure that the Bitcoin can't be compromised by any one individual in that company. So there are more advanced structures out there if you're looking to do that. And so it's generally better to hold the underlying asset versus a derivative of the asset or a proxy for the asset. So let's see here. Let's go down here. So why should Bitcoin be any different? That's the question you need to ask with the ETF. It probably won't. So if you're buying an ETF, just know there might come a time where you can't redeem your ETF shares for the Bitcoin directly, or that, they start issuing more shares for the ETF than Bitcoin. And I've talked about this before, that due to the rate of these people buying Bitcoin, the ETFs buying Bitcoin, and new entrants buying Bitcoin, the exchanges are running out of Bitcoin. And in fact, let me pull up OpenNode Bitcoin exchange Bitcoin supply. Not OpenNode, Glassnode. OpenNode is a payment thing. Glassnode exchange Bitcoin supply. Here we go. So we can look at this real quick. Glassnode is a really good reporting and data analytics platform. But here we can see, right, since back before 2012, we have the Bitcoin price. We have the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges. We see a peak happening right about here. When is this? May 15th in 2020, with 3.2 million Bitcoin on the exchanges. And then we can see it's steadily declining. We see a sharp drawdown right here, right at the end of 22. and then we just continually see a drawdown, and this has been about since the ETFs have happened, right? So the past couple months, we can see a continued drawdown as the price is going up. So the amount of Bitcoin available on exchanges is going down. We're currently, according to this, right, we're currently at about 2.3 million, which is 1 million less than the peak, roughly 1 million less than the peak. So that is happening. So that is going to be interesting to see how these ETFs manage when there's not an abundance of Bitcoin, or there isn't Bitcoin to be bought on the open market. And this is something I talked about. This is Economics 101. If the demand is still there, but the supply is not, what has to happen to the price? The price generally has to go up because people still want the Bitcoin. People still want to buy it. So if you are a person that has Bitcoin that could potentially supply the Bitcoin, right? What do? You just raise your price because the people are like, hey, I want the Bitcoin. You're like, okay, well, I'm not going to take it for 70K, right? They're like, well, how about 100K? Maybe, right? And so you'll see the spike up in price, and eventually you might see a massive spike up in price. And eventually the market will stabilize where enough sellers will come into the market at that price point to meet the demand. But that is generally what will happen. And so if the exchanges do run out of Bitcoin, we're going to see an event like that, and you're going to get a new equilibrium for where the market is for the price of Bitcoin, to where a lot of people are like, you know what, it's worth selling that Bitcoin. And I know I talk about never selling your Bitcoin, but there are times where it's not a bad idea to sell your Bitcoin. And I think like everyone has their own limits and everyone has their own perspectives on this, but a good time to sell your Bitcoin is like, and a buddy said this, is like when 0.1 Bitcoin can buy me a plot of land and a cabin in the middle of nowhere, right? Then I probably will sell some Bitcoin. So everyone has a price point that they'd sell for a certain thing. And I think that's a good perspective. It's like when Bitcoin can buy me something for my life that is like going to be like very, very, very useful for whatever it is, then I'm going to sell my Bitcoin. And that's different for every person. But generally speaking, if Bitcoin can buy you a nice plot of land, right, a nice cabin in the woods where you can get away from things, that's a good time to sell some of your Bitcoin. I don't recommend selling all your Bitcoin because then you don't have any Bitcoin, but selling some of it to do that, probably a good idea. It's probably less of a good idea to sell your Bitcoin to buy like a new fancy car or something like that is going to depreciate in value. It's probably better to sell it to buy another asset that may not appreciate as much as Bitcoin, but has more utility for the lifestyle that you want to live than what Bitcoin does. Because after all, like I love it, but Bitcoin doesn't really have much utility for my lifestyle until I sell it or trade it or leverage against it or anything like that. And that's a whole other bag of worms. Anyways, let's get back to it. So let's see here. Scroll down. Everyone hates XRP. This guy did not want to talk about it at all. Look, I am. I don't have a huge issue with altcoins. I have a small issue with altcoins. I think, I advocate for Bitcoin. I think money can be made in altcoins. It's just they haven't proven themselves as the market leader, as something that has really found a long-term home in the market. And a lot of altcoins are subject to a lot of manipulation. There's so many scams, and people have bought so many altcoins. There's 20,000+ or more being made every single day. Right? People have bought altcoins thinking they're going to be the next big thing. They're going to get massive like mainstream market adoption, only to have them just not. And then a few years later, like the price goes up, people buy, and then it collapses down, and then they never come back, and they're replaced by another new altcoin that does the same thing but better, right? And so this is a cycle that I think is a race to the bottom for most altcoins. So when we talk about XRP, I do think they have a role to play in, they're one of the early ones, and they might have potential, but I think their biggest role to play is just the battle with the SEC, right? Bringing more regulatory clarity to the space. And so I think if we look back in 5, 10, 15, 20 years on the space in the market now, and we look at XRP, I don't necessarily know if XRP is going to be around. I know Bitcoin's going to be around. Or at least I believe more strongly that Bitcoin is going to be around. But for XRP, man, I think that the big narrative is their battle against the SEC and the outcomes of that, and what it does for something like Bitcoin, maybe XRP, but like what it really does for something like Bitcoin and the regulatory environment for that. So that's why I generally don't like talk about and recommend it. But I very well could be wrong. If you hold XRP, I think there's a lot of still bullish sentiment for it. And of course, once all the SEC stuff goes away and it can actually be utilized and implemented, and we can let the market decide and see what it wants to do with it, there's options, there's opportunity. Obviously, there's a strong community around XRP. So I cannot deny that, but that's kind of all I really have to say. I can't recommend anyone buy or sell or do anything like that with it. But I do think historically XRP is a significant coin in the history of Bitcoin and the crypto space. And I do think it'll be one of the most significant coins historically looking back on that. And so for what that's worth, maybe that's something to pay attention to. Let's see here. They don't need Bitcoin to sell ETFs. Well, at this point in time, they do, right? Because I think it's spot. So it has to track the price of Bitcoin. So you have to be able to exchange it for that. If it doesn't, then if you don't have the Bitcoin in the ETF, right, then you're not actually buying something and you're not actually owning something, and it's just air. And that probably would, I'm no expert, probably bring a lot of legal scrutiny on that company. There's probably a big problem if that happens. So I think, you can probably look into this to find more information, but based upon the rules and the regulations around ETFs and the current ETFs, I think they have to have the Bitcoin on hand. So it's going to be interesting when they, if they don't, or if they can't buy it, if the buy order comes in and they can't get that much Bitcoin, that's going to be interesting when that happens. Brohawk and mullet. So it's not a mullet, man. It's just flow. It's just long flow. I just had the hat on because the hair can get wild. I've been growing. I probably should get a haircut, but I appreciate the yeah, baby, Brohawk and mullet. I don't know if I'll go mullet, but who knows? Maybe I'll get Viking haircut. What's up, Dylan? Hey, how's it going? ETFs won't run out of Bitcoin. Them buying it will only drive the price up. We're not saying that the ETFs will necessarily run out of Bitcoin per se. Like, yes, them buying it will drive the price up. But if there's no Bitcoin on the market to buy, of course, that will drive the price up. Okay, we know how much Bitcoin there is, and so the issue isn't necessarily running out of Bitcoin. It's running out of Bitcoin at the prices that the current market prices. Because if someone just snapped their fingers and there was no more Bitcoin, as I said before, or people weren't selling their Bitcoin tomorrow, like that just happens, but the demand would still remain the same. You would have a frenzy and you'd have a massive price appreciation, and then eventually people will start selling their Bitcoin, right? That's how it's going to happen. And so the event could be when the amount of Bitcoin remains really low. You're going to have speculators coming in and say, oh, wow, I've seen the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges go down dramatically. I think there's going to be a supply shock and there might be a squeeze on the price of Bitcoin, and so I'm just not going to sell, right? And so they're going to be more likely to hold on to the Bitcoin in anticipation of that supply shock, because they're speculating that in the future, maybe a short-term future, they could get double or triple their money for that same Bitcoin. So why sell today if you can wait a short amount of time and get double or triple your money, right? And so you're going to see that kind of happen if the market starts feeling that, hey, there's not going to be enough Bitcoin available on these exchanges for the demand. And the reason why the exchanges are important, because even though individuals hold Bitcoin, exchanges are a lot more efficient way of buying, selling, and exchanging the goods and services than the Bitcoin. And I think this is just going to be a trend that keeps going down over time, especially as Bitcoin price goes up. I think more and more people like myself that are like, hey, I'm going to self-custody. The number of those people are growing. And there's charts out there that show that. I should probably find those, number of unique Bitcoin addresses. Let's see this out. Something. That's kind of, blockchain.com, total addresses. Let's see here. Okay. Here we go. Total addresses, right? We're seeing an increase of total Bitcoin addresses just continue to go up, right? So this is the chart, right? This is the Bitcoin price, and total addresses are skyrocketing. So we have, let's see here, 1.2 billion total addresses. Now doesn't mean that's how many people, because some people have multiple addresses, but this is going up. So what that means is more and more people are holding Bitcoin, and this number is going to continue to go up, because even though it's 1.2 billion, right, you're probably a lot less. It's probably 100 to 300 million people individually that hold Bitcoin around the world of some sort, right? So it has a lot higher to go. So even if half the people in the world held Bitcoin, right, you're going to have way more than 4 billion addresses, right? We're probably looking at, like, if it's 3 addresses per person, so that's 10 to 15 billion addresses. So, we still have a 10 to 15x just in addresses for that. And this is just guessing and forecasting out there. But What that means is that more and more people are holding Bitcoin individually. And so you're going to see, and more people individually are demanding Bitcoin. So you're going to see the volume of Bitcoin on exchanges continue to go down. Okay, let's see here. Most of us know nothing about Bitcoin. We seniors live our old way. I try to learn, but it's all Greek to me. So, hey, if you are in that position, like if you're older and you don't know anything about Bitcoin, find someone that you can trust, right? I know, come on the AMA, just listen, do some research, right? Go look up, MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor. He talks, really smart guy, billionaire. He's done a lot in Bitcoin, with Bitcoin. Look at the book, read the book, The Bitcoin Standard. Just start educating yourself, or if you have someone in your family, or you can reach out to me and just have someone that you can talk to and trust. I think that's really important, because unfortunately there are a lot of scams going on that are taking advantage of elderly people who aren't quite as tech savvy, or don't quite understand things as much when it comes to like the tech stuff, right? Which is fair, right? And people do take advantage of that. And there's just terrible scammers out there that will do that. So just be careful out there, be cautious with this, but just because you don't understand it, I don't think that is an excuse or should be a reason why you don't try to learn about it. But just, take it slow and make sure you have someone that you can trust that can like have your back or help you, make the right decisions at the right time. So this person says one day dollars will not be in the equation. Possibly, people like to say the dollar is going to die forever. I think it's going to change, right? The dollar we know is just going to change forms. We don't want the dollar to die, right? As Americans, it's done well for America. Now, it's currently hurting certain generations in America, not the non-boomers, because the boomers basically have gotten all the appreciation of assets because of the inflation of the dollar, right? And with less demand for them. But, you're better off here in America with the dollar than elsewhere. Okay. And so of all the currencies, the dollar is generally considered like the best, or one of the best. So we don't want it necessarily to go away. Just know that the dollar is not a good vehicle for storing your wealth long term. It's very efficient and very good for, hey, I cut your grass, for $15 an hour or $20 an hour, I cut your grass, you give me $20. It's very, very good for that. It's not very good for then you putting that $20 in a piggy bank and hoping that saving that money will pay off. It's much better, especially with the tools and resources today, that you can deposit that into a bank, and then you can use that $20 as deposit into a bank to then purchase an asset that you can invest in, and you can buy just $1 worth of something, $5 worth of something. So you don't have to have a lot of money to start getting exposure to different assets out there that will appreciate in value over time relative to the dollar, right? Something like Bitcoin, for example. You can buy Bitcoin with like $1. Okay, so you don't have to buy a full Bitcoin. And so that's one of the amazing innovations that technology has provided us, that even as a kid, if you're a parent and you have kids or a grandparent, you should educate them. Hey, you cut the grass, you earn some money. Great. We're going to get a bank account set up for you. We're going to make sure it can be tied to certain investment accounts, and a portion of that $20 you got for cutting the grass, say it's $5, it's your family, your rules, but has to be put into an asset, right? Or something that it can be considered an asset that you're investing in, right? And so even for a kid, it's like, hey, what type of toys do you like? All right, we're going to put $5 in, say you like Nintendo. We're going to put $5 in Nintendo because you like playing with Nintendo games and stuff like that. I wish my parents would have done that, okay? I should probably do more of that now for the products and services that I like. I should just put a little bit of money in them. If I'm buying the product, you should buy, which is generally a depreciating thing, right? Buying an iPhones depreciate in value, okay? But buying Apple, we've seen Apple stock increase in value. So you should probably put a portion of your money in there, and that's a good lesson to teach your kids. So anyways, you can do that with just $1, $5, $10 with apps like Robinhood, with apps like Swan Bitcoin or River or even Coinbase. You can buy just small fractions of a Bitcoin with that money. So take your dollars and turn it into assets. Some people, keep in mind, some people will not be able to sell because of tax consequences, so not all shares will be sold. So you're less than weeks from seeing no supply of Bitcoin. Yeah, so Grayscale is basically like this big supply that's been being drained because they were a trust. They were one of the only ways people could get exposure to Bitcoin without buying Bitcoin, and there were certain benefits depending on the discount or the premium of the trust at that point in time that people were playing on. But as a trust, they have different fee structure than the ETFs. And because now these ETFs are live, right, that has been approved, because a lot of people have talked about Grayscale turning into an ETF or someone buying out Grayscale. That could be something that happens in the future. But because of the current competitive landscape in the market, the free market's kind of doing its thing, generally free market. What we're seeing is people that can cash out their shares in Grayscale, there's opportunities for them to go and make more money or pay less fees with these other ETFs. So that's a big thing of what's happening. It's just like you have a less attractive product versus a more attractive product, and people can, like, their capital isn't locked up anymore, right? Or it's not, there's not as much friction to remove the capital from it. So people can and will, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing that. And this person points out some people can't sell, or they won't want to sell, or for whatever reasons, and they'll keep their shares in the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and it will stay, like, the Bitcoin will stay there. So there will probably be a floor, but what Grayscale has to do is they have to then make a more competitive offering. Like, obviously this is a sign to them that, hey, like, we're being outcompeted. We no longer have kind of a monopoly on this space, right? And so they've got to make some strategic decisions regarding their trust and what product offerings they're offering to the market in order to continue their business model. Otherwise, eventually it will die if they just have an inferior product. Like MySpace died because Facebook was just generally seen on the market as better. Let's see here. Right, this person says as well, funds first Bitcoin had exorbitant fees. This guy got rid of all his mine and relocated them to FBTC and MicroStrategy. The other ETFs will eat whatever Bitcoin Grayscale has to sell. Yeah, exactly the point, right? So high fees, why pay 10 times the fees when you don't have to? Let's see here, which is a smart move. Like, the market will act rationally in that respect. We'll have to move the fractional Bitcoin to keep splitting up to provide more volume for demand. So this is the thing that's going to be interesting, is Bitcoin can be split into 100 million Satoshis. And so that's how they can be divided up. And you don't necessarily need, which is 2.1 quadrillion, 100 million times 21 million. So it's 2.1 quadrillion individual units. So the one thing I like to express to people is that when you're living in the fiat world, especially, the dollar-based fiat world, you generally think price has to go up. Okay, the numerical value of things needs to increase. And the only reason that you think that is because you've seen it for your life, because the value of the dollar has decreased. So $1 buys you less, right? You probably hear stories from your grandparents or great-grandparents, or just they're kind of memes by now. Oh, I could buy a pack of gum for a penny, right? And now you got to pay $1 for a pack of gum, or whatever it is, like something simple like that. Okay, so it's not like the gum is any different. Right? It's not like that the gum is now worth 100 pennies now. It's just that the value of that unit of currency has decreased. And so the dollar today is equivalent to a penny years ago. And that's not the exact exchange, but that has been happening. So, and you see this example is really played out when you have a country that with a hyperinflating currency. Like if you look at Weimar Germany, or you look at something like Argentina. Right? So the things in the country, the goods and services in the country haven't changed. They're not more expensive. Like, and if you equate more expensive to being better, they're not better, right? A year from 1 year today versus a year or 5 years or 10 years ago. It's just the currency used to buy it has decreased in value. So it takes more of that currency to buy that same product, which is why it's good to not store your wealth in that currency. So, and something like this in a hyperinflating world, yes, the numerical value of things will go up, but you need to then find a normal baseline to compare that against. And so what's happening with something like Bitcoin, because it has a fixed supply, when the prices in fiat go up, you also get the prices in Bitcoin go up. So Bitcoin, when you convert to fiat dollars, will be astronomical. But what you really need to look at is, how many Bitcoin or what percentage of Bitcoin can purchase the goods and services in the real world. Okay, right now I think the average house is like $400,000, and let's say Bitcoin, this is for easy math. Let's say Bitcoin. Let's do math, live on camera. But let's say Bitcoin is $50,000. Okay, so math, 8 Bitcoin for a house for $50,000. Let's just say that's what it is. Okay, so that's how many Bitcoin it takes to buy a house. Right, last year it took double that because Bitcoin was like $25,000. Okay. And over time, if you plot this trend, you'll see that it's taking less and less Bitcoin to buy a house. So eventually it'll be 1 Bitcoin per house, or a half a Bitcoin per house if Bitcoin goes to $800,000 or whatnot. So you'll see that. And that's, depending on how much house rises. So you're seeing the purchasing power of holding Bitcoin outpacing the price increases of the goods and services that you may want to buy or sell in the fiat world. And that's a trend that has been going on, and I think will continue with Bitcoin. So that's really what you're looking for. So then you don't have to split up the Bitcoin anymore. It's just that you have more purchasing power with the Bitcoin, and then the fiat prices start to become irrelevant because, again, if the purchasing, the value of the Bitcoin that you're holding, the purchasing power of that Bitcoin that you're holding is outpacing the increase in prices, the fiat prices of goods and services you want to buy, then that will trend to zero. It won't matter, and then basically you'll have a system reset without going into too much detail. Okay, so. There's a lot there. This person says a week ago there was 1.8 million Bitcoin on exchanges. Now it's down to 1.75. 50,000 per week means empty in 35 weeks. And when it gets low, sellers would think about the future value of Bitcoin. So exactly what I said, right? So 35 weeks, that's less than a year. There's 52 weeks in a year. So less than a year, if this trend continues of Bitcoin's outflows from exchanges, which it looks like it's continuing, going back to this chart, right? We see it going down. And so their numbers are slightly off or slightly different, but the sentiment still remains of like the amount of Bitcoin being drained from the exchanges. And I don't know if their math is completely correct. It might be. You can do a calculator, but it just shows that there will be a time where that happens, a supply shock happens, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen. And so if you are future looking, right, skating to where the puck is going to be, versus where it's at, right, you can start thinking about that. Let's see here. Grayscale reducing their fees. Let's see, gold price manipulation. They don't need Bitcoin to back its ETF. They do right now, but what happens is they generally don't have enough Bitcoin to back it, and so then what they'll do is they'll just change what the value of a share is, right? And they say, okay, we only need 50% of the Bitcoin to back our ETFs so they can maintain their shares, so they can sell more shares, right? That's one of the reasons why you have to be careful buying an ETF, right? Because you have to trust a third party, and what we know is that eventually they get compromised. It just happens every single time. So owning the actual fundamental underlying asset is generally superior to owning the ETF, generally speaking. So if you can buy Bitcoin directly, buy Bitcoin directly. Not financial advice. Gold and silver I have. Bitcoin, gold are gold mining stocks. Of course, not financial advice, but having some gold and silver is very, very important. Having all gold and silver is probably a bad idea. If you look at the price movements of gold and silver over the past 10 years, they haven't done much, but having some is practical, especially in what happens if the internet goes down scenario, which that's a whole other thing. But buying Bitcoin or gold mining stocks, you can buy both, right? You don't have to just buy one or the other. I think it's good that if you have exposure to Bitcoin, we're talking like for the very conservative person, 1 to 5%. Of course, I think people should be more exposed to Bitcoin, especially if you're listening to this, but 1 to 5% is a reasonable exposure, okay? So if you only have 1% of your portfolio to allocate, maybe you have to start questioning, like, what's the other 99% of your portfolio allocated towards, and should it still be allocated towards that? So if you're looking at Bitcoin versus gold mining stocks takes, I think, a little bit more knowledge and insight to get right. Bitcoin's simple. You just buy and hold. So that's why I generally recommend Bitcoin. And gold mining stocks, you'd have to, when you're comparing those, look at the growth rate of Bitcoin and its future projections and think, will my capital outpace the growth of Bitcoin? And in every scenario, it won't do that, okay? Unless you think there's going to be some black swan event where Bitcoin is just going to completely crash and die off for the long term, then that's a different scenario. But history has held true so far that no one's ever lost money holding Bitcoin for 4+ years. And so if you have a long-term time horizon, Bitcoin is it's not a bad idea, even at the all-time highs. How you get Dylan's book? Hey, thank you very much. You can get my book, this copy of the Bitcoin Business Accelerator. You can go to dylanmbradley.com/BBA, or just go to Amazon and look up Bitcoin Business Accelerator. I do have another one called The Crypto, which was the first one, which talks about crypto consulting. This is about Bitcoin consulting. I have videos explaining the difference between those. They're basically the same thing, but teaches you how to start and grow a Bitcoin or crypto consulting business in 30 days or less. It gives you all the stuff that you need to know. So it's a good book. I highly recommend it. So what if no one sells, no one buys, price don't move? That's not true, right? I mean, I guess it is true, but it would say that there's no demand at all for the thing, and that's just not true, right? So if no one's selling and there's still demand, right, price will go up. If no one's selling and there's no demand, generally that happens is everyone's trying to sell and there's no demand, right? So the price goes down. Max Kaiser, who tipped the restaurant waiter, man, I would have loved to have met Max Kaiser back in the day. Right. Crypto uses massive amounts of electricity. Let's see here. What happens if an EMP or a CME occurs? You aren't able to trade or withdraw. Does the whole thing get shut down? So, man, EMPs. How many EMPs have occurred? Not many. The one actual risk is something like a Carrington event. The problem with that, which is basically where you have a solar flare, which creates an EMP and hits a certain part of the planet and basically fries the electrical grid. And that's actually a serious problem. And that's one of the more likely celestial events to happen. So you can look that up. I think one happened in like the early 1900s, and a bunch of like things caught on fire, and we didn't really know because we didn't have the electrical infrastructure up that we do now. But what happens then is generally what that is a localized apocalypse. Obviously, there's localized apocalypse and global apocalypse. If a global apocalypse happens, none of this stuff matters that we're talking about, right? It's survival mode. And so it's just like the market and the local market will dictate what works. And so even if you have hordes of gold, you have to be able to protect it. You have to actually be in the house that you have the gold in and be able to defend that position and be able to carry that gold with you in the event of something like that. So that's just kind of it's not really relevant or that productive or constructive to think about that, because all the things we're talking about is just a totally different scenario. We can talk about apocalyptic scenarios, but it's like thinking that's going to happen is like this whole rabbit hole, right? A localized apocalypse is like the Carrington event or a localized EMP. Bitcoin's global, so nothing will happen. You might have a small dip in price if a major country like the USA goes down for a period of time, but the rest of the world uses Bitcoin. The rest of the world will still have internet, will still have power, and for the Bitcoin network to work, you just need two computers that can communicate with each other. Okay, and you don't need the internet. There's Bitcoin nodes on satellite, so you can ping a satellite. There's mesh networks, so basically a network that is established through like multiple devices that can be connected. So you can do that. That will continue the blockchain. So it's very, 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 very hard you would have to kill Bitcoin. You'd have to destroy every single computer in the world, anything with connectivity. Again, that leads to the global apocalyptic scenario. So what's more likely is a localized apocalypse. We saw this kind of in Ukraine with the Ukraine war, where basically you have a severe disruption of daily life and information being able to be transferred back and forth. We didn't really see that impact the Bitcoin price. Maybe there was a dip up or dip down, but here we are at 70K a year and a half later from that. So or a year later, whenever it happened, whenever it started. So, that's what you really have to ask is maybe locally it might be tough, but again, as long as the rest of the world is operating the Bitcoin blockchain, locally, like your Bitcoin's fine. Like it doesn't matter where you're at. Your address is on the public blockchain, and so it's still going to be on the public blockchain. You're not going to lose it. So as long as you can get network connection to verify the transaction that you're sending, you're going to be fine. Or right, as long as the network is let me find one of these things. So as long as the network is operational, like this is a physical Bitcoin. So the private keys are embedded on this coin, right? And so I know how much is on here. So in a localized apocalypse, I could use something like this to trade goods and services, because I know the Bitcoin is secure on this coin, and I don't need internet connectivity in order to transfer funds from one wallet to another. I can just hand you this coin in the physical world. So that's another thing that can be done, or you can use in sort of a local apocalypse. And eventually the power is going to come back on. The internet's going to come back on. The Bitcoin blockchain you're going to be able to access the blockchain locally. It's still going to be there. Your funds are still going to be there, just as long as your private keys were secure. So I hope that explains that. Let's see here. This is XRP ADA link, old stuff dead. That's what I'm talking about with some of these altcoins, is these projects are hyped up as amazing. Like they all this backing, they all this hype, but then they don't do what they promise to do. And then years later, like there's new products and projects out there that are better. So that's a real problem with altcoins. There's always something better. And we're kind of seeing that with Solana right now versus Ethereum, some of the other layer ones. Solana just has a market, it's fitting a market niche. Low fees, easy to get into, and meme coins for gambling, basically. So money, time, and attention is being devoted there versus Ethereum. Even though Ethereum has been around, it's the second biggest. It has a lot of promise, a lot of hype around it. But Ethereum is dealing with a problem with it's like harder to get into because of the fee structure and things like that. Now, it's not necessarily dead, but that is a real threat to Ethereum if Solana does basically the same thing. It's an issue. There's other issues with things like Ethereum and Solana from a Bitcoin perspective, but anyways, that's another story. Dave Ramsey says Bitcoin not proven since it's too new. I mean, when you look at thousands of years of history that gold has, yes, Bitcoin is new, but Bitcoin is 15 years old. So we're saying that, the iPhone isn't proven because it's too new. No, right? It has market adoption. People use it. It does what it says it's going to do. And the iPhone has this thing has more errors than Bitcoin, right? Updates, software patches, bugs, all this kind of stuff happens with this, and people still use the iPhone. Okay, so something with Bitcoin, yes, it's new relative to something like gold and silver. Yes, right, that is true. But it's been around 15 years and has operated flawlessly for 15 years. Now, I do think if you're going to put a significant investment into it, or you're going to really depend on Bitcoin for your future, something like that, like you want to make sure it works. You want to make sure that there's not going to be some random black swan event that just destroys it overnight. And so far, right, and that's a reasonable question, it's a reasonable fear, it's a reasonable doubt. But when you do the research, what you'll find is that Bitcoin is very, very robust. It is backed by the most secure, largest computing network in the world, right? Fully decentralized. It operates on its own. The crazy thing is like Bitcoin creates its own time. I go look up Durgigi. I think that's his name or his Twitter X handle, where he talks about how Bitcoin creates its own time, and that's what makes it truly decentralized versus other protocols. Really fascinating stuff. And when you go down that rabbit hole, you're like, yeah, it does have some merit. And if it could have been destroyed already by the governments, then it would have been destroyed. I think the only other attack, because they can't destroy it right now, is they have to try and control enough of it to where they can potentially destroy it with like a big massive attack. I don't know if that's even going to be possible to do that. So it's kind of here to stay, because if it could have been wiped out, it probably would have been, because of the threat it poses, or the transformation it poses, and the loss of power that will be suffered by the current institutions and individuals that hold that power in the fiat system. Right? It's just like what Netflix did to Blockbuster. That is a simple example of. So, anyways, I don't think it's too new. I think it's early, but some people, everyone buys Bitcoin at the price that they deserve. Bitcoin don't really know what the person is talking about. Again, looks like a scam right there. Again, a lot of people want to just get rich quick. Boo, Solana, the Polish chain. There's always competitors. There's always people pumping up some meme coin or whatnot. Terrible audio. Yeah, we had to use the phone audio to do the dual one with the microphone plugged in. Then you couldn't hear out of the phone, so that's why it was less than ideal. It's fake money, whatever that means. This looks like a scam right here. Yep, that's a scam. So, right, pay attention to that. Bitcoin Cash was a fork of Bitcoin, promised to use. Larger blocks, more transactions, cheaper fees. And if you look at the price of Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin Cash has clearly lost, right? It's clearly not kept up with Bitcoin. It has not kept up with the market adoption. So the market has decided Bitcoin Cash is trash. It doesn't mean it doesn't have maybe niche use cases, but it's not going to outcompete Bitcoin at this point in time. Let's see here. Trading and investing, this could potentially be a scam with all these comments on there, right? So, but it's a legit question. If you don't know anything about that, don't click on any links or listen to anyone that comments on these YouTube videos. Join us for the crypto AMA. That by joining the Ninja newsletter, you get the invite there. Right, that looks like another scam there. Bitcoin is just funny money. Any who gambles with it and loses. No one's ever lost with Bitcoin holding it over 4 years. Most people that have bought Bitcoin, except maybe people who have bought in the last month, are in profits. So, the majority of people who have Bitcoin, unless you just sold it and are out and you sold it for a loss, if you've held Bitcoin, you haven't lost. Right? And this is held true. Bitcoin will make more like the Feds create dollars. You can't make more Bitcoin. That's the whole point. That's why Bitcoin is worth what it is. There's only going to be 21 million. You can't just make more. They won't make more. If they try to make more, it won't be Bitcoin. And because of that, it won't outcompete Bitcoin. It'll be an inferior product because you have a centralized entity that's making more Bitcoin. You don't need to make more Bitcoin, and since it's not centralized, this statement, Bitcoin will just make more like the Feds create dollars. No, not true, because it's not a centralized institution. You can't just push a button and make more Bitcoin. Let's see. The last one here is Gordon Gekko's tulip picture frame. People traded in their mansions for a few tulips and it all went bust. Bitcoin will suffer the same fate. People have been saying that for 15 years. I want to just look up Tulip Mania time frame. So Bitcoin has been going on for 15 years. Okay. Tulip Mania, 3 years, right? 1634 and collapse in 1637. So that is a small bubble. So it might have been applicable or more reasonable to make that statement maybe during the first bubble, maybe during the second bubble of Bitcoin. But at this point in time, we're seeing a clear Bitcoin cycle, right? If you just look at this chart, we're seeing clear Bitcoin cycles of price going up, right? And this is a logarithmic chart, by the way, right? Because, this is $657 and this is $70,000, so it's a log chart. So otherwise, it would the curve would be different, right? So, but we have this bubble, right? 2013, oh my gosh, right? It goes down. 2013, it really spikes up at the end of 2013, then it dies off, right? Then it really spikes up 2018, 17, 18, all right? Then it dies off. Then we have the two peaks up here, right? And then now we're back up here. So, if it was a bubble, right? It's one of the biggest bubbles, but it's still going, and the demand for Bitcoin is just increasing, and the viability of Bitcoin is just increasing. And if you saw the future, you understood what it was back here, good on you, right? You made a really good play, right? Back in 2016, when Bitcoin was $500, I think what the Ninja said around here is when he first got into Bitcoin, right? You're really lucky, okay? But it's still early, right? We're still at the beginnings of adoption for Bitcoin. So, been going on for a while for this video. Just want to cover a lot of the comments. As you can see, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of discussion on Bitcoin, what it is, how it works, addressing myths and fears and all that kind of stuff. So it's just important to have these discussions. And for you listening or watching to this, thank you very much. Please hit subscribe, hit like. Let me know what your comments are below. I'll make some more short videos on these topics. And just pay attention. Make sure to go and do your research, right? Spend a couple hours this weekend learning about Bitcoin. I think you'll be better off because of it. So that's all for now. Thank you very much. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.